Hi, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. I'm your host, Phil Huber. Today, joined by the usual cast of suspects, John Doyle and Logan Whitmer. We're here to talk about woodworking. On today's episode, we're going to check in with Logan on his church door project, find out how all the mortising went, and then get a refresher on the finishing schedule that he's going to be going on. Another thing we'll be talking about today is peering into our magic 8-ball into the future of woodworking and tool making specifically. So you want to make sure that you join us for today's episode. Thanks as always for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us by email, woodsmith@woodsmith.com, or as always, leave a comment on our YouTube channel. There you can find us at the ShopNotes Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe and ring the bell there when you do. Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Harvey Industries. Good enough is not good enough. See all of our new tools at harveywoodworking.com. Episode 234.
We did it.
Makes you wonder, will we be here for 345? And what will that look like?
235.
I hope not.
235.
Yeah.
When last we left our intrepid hero, Logan Whitmer, he was about to engage a lot of mortising, creating dust and trying to find all the crevices in his shop where he can deposit mortise dust.
Yeah. It's been deposited, that's for sure. Yeah. Like, honestly, though, like, using the... So I didn't end up using that long bit because it was super grabby. I think I said that last time.
Right.
Cat and dog are fighting in the background. I don't know if you guys can see that or not.
Oh, there we go.
Like, yep. There's a throwdown going on. So I ended up using a really nice Woodpecker's ultra shear spiral upcut bit that I had. And honestly, like, that thing pulled more ribbons than it did dust, which was actually really nice because it all kind of just ends up right there on the table. But the mortising went super fast, super easy. Absolutely zero issues with it. The only, not even an issue. The only thing that I knew to watch out for is the stiles on these doors are so long, and they're 6-inch wide mahogany, so they're fairly heavy. When you clamp them down to the pantry router table, it gets a little tippy. So just get out a couple roller stands. Yeah. And that was pretty much it. So yeah, she went really nice, really easy. Doors are all mortised. The loose tenons are all cut. I was able to salvage. I've talked about that wormy stuff that I had issues with, that mahogany. I was able to resaw some of the wormy stuff and make loose tenons out of it. So I was able to use that at least. And I ended up, obviously doing slot mortises with a router, the pantry router. You're left with rounded ends. Because there's so many panels and angles and stuff, I wanted the tenons that have just a hair of wiggle room in them.
Okay.
They're tight thickness-wise. Like, thickness-wise, it's a perfect fit. It's actually a point where you had to use pliers to get them out, which is fine. But I ended up chamfering the edges of the. So when I cut the stock, they would fit in the rounded mortise fine.
Okay.
But chamfering the corners allows maybe an 1/8 inch of like adjustment, which is all I really want.
Right.
So got those done. Today's Friday. I did that Tuesday, something like that. And then I also decided, so the main rails that connect into the stiles, those are all loose tenon. So I got 2 on top, 2 on bottom, and then 1 in the others. But there's a center stile. There's 2 center stiles that are short.
Okay.
To break up the rails, right? And those are kind of loose and float in there. And the way that rail in the center is angled, there's a lot of movement there. Like that stile can actually come out completely one way where the angle opens up bigger.
Oh,
if that makes sense.
Yep.
So when you're trying to glue everything, or when you're assembling everything, it's a lot of wiggling to get stuff lined up where it's supposed to go. Like if you tap the bottommost center stile left or right, the middle stile loosens up and shifts left or right depending on how everything's going.
Oh, geez.
So it was kind of a mess. So my initial thought was, as I'm going to glue these up, I'm going to glue that center stile onto the rails, but then shoot some like 15 gauge nails through that cope and stick joint just to hold everything. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to really have to there's going to be wet glue on everything. Like I don't want to deal with that. So I ended up dry assembling both doors. And then I positioned everything where it needs to be, marked it, and then I ran a single dowel to connect that center rail or the center stile to each of the rails. So I have basically a registration pin.
Oh, yeah.
As I'm assembling everything. So that was kind of a spur of the moment decision. I wasn't planning on doing that because I think I wanted a little bit of wiggle room as I was assembling stuff. But I decided it was better to just be diligent about the dry assembly, measure everything, get it where I want it, mark it, drill accurate dowel holes. So that's what I did. So I'm at the point where I spent pretty much all day yesterday. I freaking hate sanding raised panels. Like if there was anything to keep me from doing like kitchen cabinets for a living, it would be sanding raised panel doors. I don't think anybody does raised panel doors anymore, but if they did, nope, absolutely not. I'm done.
No, I think there are plenty of raised panels that still get done.
Yeah. Like, part of me is like, how do we feel about brush sanders? Like, Grizzly has one that is getting released at the tent sale that we are going to in two weeks.
Yep.
A little over 2 weeks. So they have a new one that's more like a drum sander style.
Right.
But I have several for my drill that I use, like if I'm doing like hollow forms on the lathe, and I'm like, ooh, I could probably chuck that in there and do it. And I did, and it works really nicely. But what it ends up doing is it ends up rounding over the top of the raised panel a little bit.
Oh.
Like softening that edge. I don't know that's the end of the world. But I was afraid of losing the crisp lines that I wanted.
Yeah.
So I ended up hand sanding them all with little sanding sponges and stuff. Although I have started to follow. So for the longest time, I have been a sand it to 400 grit type of person.
Okay.
However, Bob Flexner passed away earlier this year, and I've been going back through some of his old articles that he had submitted through Popwood, and he had a good analogy in there. He's like, sanding's like taking a bath. Get out of the damn bath when you're clean. So basically, sanding is sand to remove the machine marks, and that's it. And that was his mentality. And a lot of it has to do with the top coat that you're putting on it. Like, is the molecular level of the finish bigger than your sanding scratches? Because if it is, there's no reason to sand finer.
Right.
And there's also, he talks about depending on the species of wood, the wood fibers are bigger or smaller. So there are certain species that you can sand finer and you'll actually get a smoother surface. There are others where you're actually not doing anything because the wood fibers themselves are too big. So I only sanded these doors up to 180, which to me feels a little bit weird because, again, I'm usually my sandpaper drawers go from 80 grit up to 360. And I'm usually going to 360, then I'll finish sand at 400. But it feels weird. But I'm trusting Bob Flexner's advice. The stain took wonderful. The stain looks fantastic. So I just, don't know. I feel dirty about it, but I'm doing it.
John.
Yes.
I saw the look on your face when he said he only sanded to 180 and also to 400.
Oh, yeah.
John's like, there's a 400?
That was a raise I brought. Yeah. It's like 120, 150, maybe, if I want to polish it.
But seriously, like, John, you came from, I mean, it's been decades ago now, but you came from an
turn
industry.
Turn of the century.
You came from industry, right?
Yes.
Like, I have to assume, like, a big millwork or cabinet shop is not sanding to 300, 320.
No.
Like, they're probably going 150, 180, right? And you can get a pretty dang smooth surface.
Yeah, especially if you're staining something. I mean, if you sand up any more than that, the stain's just wiping right off because it's so smooth. So it won't even take stain. So, yeah. But I could see, like, I don't know, maybe in turning and, like, closed grain woods, and you're just doing a clear finish that you'd want it to go that high, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. And, like, to be honest with you, that all started with me as I was kind of starting to begin woodworking and trying to imitate some of the Thomas Mosier type stuff, because that was his finish schedule, was sand to 400, but the finish is a smoky, like literally smoking hot linseed oil.
Right.
So you're not actually putting a film on stuff. So the surface of the wood is what you end up feeling anyways. So that's where that came from, but I'm kind of backing off that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that because it all depends on what you're considering the finish. You know, if you're going up to 400, then the surface of the wood, quote unquote, is part of the finish.
Yes.
So that you can get by with, you know, for a small box or a turning, you could just wax it, just be done.
Yep.
And you get a nice, it's not experiencing a lot of wear and tear. You know, these are dustables in a sense. Mm-hmm. You know, when Mike was here doing his box for the TV show, he was using white oak and sanded up to 400, but he was doing 2 super thin coats of shellac and a coat of wax, and that's his finish schedule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, whereas I probably fall more towards John's camp where, especially if I'm staining, you know, I'm not going past 180 at all because I want that stain to take. Especially if I'm going to use a gel stain where I'm making a drastic color change in the material.
Yeah. Yep. But, you know, like, and it was interesting because I have always, for the most part, power sanded with random orbit. And then I do go back and hand sand with the grain, because if I'm not staining something, or if you're not staining something, pigtails are fairly unnoticeable, right? Like, you don't really see them if it's a clear finish.
Right.
But if you are putting a pigment on top of the surface, those little pigtail swirls, those really jump out if you do that. And again, going back to Bob Flexer's book, or some of his articles, he talks about, power sand, man, like power sand, but your final step, take whatever grit you finish power sanding with, grab a fresh pad and hand sand with the grain. You're not going crazy. All you're doing is you're taking those little swirls that are inevitably there,
right,
and you are disrupting them and making them linear with the grain where you don't see them.
Yeah.
So it was pretty cool.
I would also be interested to know, one of those things like woodworkers see pigtail swirls in finish. How many folk actually see those? And the reason that I say that is one of our last projects that we filmed for the TV show this season was the bar cabinet. And the bar top that we did was glued up mahogany, and we put a darker stain on that. I don't remember which one was that. Was that the American walnut?
It was Old Master's American Walnut gel stain.
Okay. And we put that on, and I think I had just sanded that with just power sanded it, and then you put the stain on, and afterwards we could see the pigtails, but we had a hard time showing that to our production crew where they noticed it.
Yeah. The camera operator's like, I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Right. And then we had some finish troubles with that top, so we ended up having to resand it and refinish it. Mm-hmm. And then I did that, power sanded it, and then finished up by hand, like you said. And it really is just a handful of swipes back and forth across the surface.
Yeah, it's not much.
And then redid the stain, and then the camera crew came back for some final shots, and then they were able to see like kind of a before and after, but it was still a very subtle detail.
Yeah.
I think we sanded that to like 180, 150 or 180.
Yeah. And honestly, there's the rule of thumb is always you never go up in grit by more than 50%. So if you're using a 100 grit, you can go to 150, but don't go to 180, right? So like doing like just the panel. So yesterday I sanded all the panels. I also stained one door's worth of panels. I stained another door's worth of panels this morning. I also hand sanded yesterday the cope or the cope and stick joint on the inside of the rails and stiles, that OG profile, which I actually went through, applied a bunch of packing tape to it, and then I made a Bondo sanding pad or sanding block that matched the profile.
Okay.
Didn't work. The block worked. Like it worked, and the profile's perfect. But it's such a small OG. It's maybe 3/8 by 3/8 total profile. Like you can't actually get sandpaper to sit inside of it and sand the profile. Okay. It was a great idea. I think if I had maybe one of the sanding films that are like super thin and not trying to use like I don't know, like I'm trying to use a sanding disc that's hook and loop.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. Anyways, but I sanded all that with a couple sanding sponges that I had. I'm not talking like drywall sponges that get Menards. I'm talking like nice Unita ones. And that went pretty quick. Again, I'm using Sharp brand new shaper cutters, so that left me a pretty good finish on all of this stuff. Even the OGs on the raised panels. The biggest thing I was concentrating on those is when I'm finishing them is the end grain on the top and the bottom of the panels, because I'm trying to not sand that to a higher grit, but get a higher finish on that so it doesn't soak up as much stain as the rest of the panel, because it soaks in a little bit more readily, so you get a little bit darker stain on the end grain. But yeah, Yeah, the staining went great. I don't stain very often. I don't care for how stain looks, but I have to say, like, I'm using an Old Masters rich mahogany stain on this mahogany, and it looks so good. I'm super happy with the color on it. And stain comes in like several flavors, right? And I'm not talking Minwax. Like, Minwax stain is crap. Sorry, Minwax. Like, any stain you go and get from a big box store, Minwax, Varathane, whatever. The big box store stains are crap. Like, you need a good stain. So, I mean, it just happens that the Old Masters does underwrite our TV show, so I'm using their stain. But the difference in using like a nice stain and a crappy stain is night and day. And the one we used on the TV show was a gel stain, so it comes out like pudding consistency, right?
Right.
So you got the gel stain, you got like the standard oil-based stain. Like, it is runny, it is liquidy, you know, it soaks in really quickly. But then you also have wiping stain. And the Old Masters wiping stain that I have is in between those two. It's not super runny. It's the consistency of heavy cream, I guess.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So when you apply it, it looks like you are wiping on latex paint. It is that consistency, and there is that much pigment in it that you would think that you're wiping on a brown paint. But it stains so even. I have 0 splotches, a few drips, but I did preemptively put a drop cloth down before I did it. I did also this is one thing I picked up from the finishing room in the shop. We have a rail system in the finishing room in that shop of pipes. So you can hang up parts and spray them if you wanted. And obviously big production shops would have similar things. I really like hanging stuff as I'm finishing it. So I screwed in eyelets on the top of every panel, and then I went and bought aluminum. It's aluminum wire for hanging up a drop ceiling. So it's maybe 1/8 inch diameter, maybe a little bit smaller than 1/8 inch diameter. It's 12 gauge wire. And I made hooks, and I have all the panels hung up. Yeah, it makes it so easy. So, okay. Not saying I want to stain all my projects, but nice stain, nice system makes it a little bit easier for sure.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and add the Minwax users and Varathane users to our beef list.
Yes, thank you.
So we're going to be hearing from them.
You know what you did, you guys.
Yep. Let us know in the comments.
You want a glue that you can trust, and fortunately, Titebond has the glue you need to get the job done with confidence. From interior glues with strong initial tack and short clamp time, to exterior glues with exceptional strength and water resistance, look to Titebond, the right glue for your next project. For more information, visit Titebond.com.
Yep. So I ended up hanging all of the panels. So this is an issue with having really tall ceilings in your shop. It is very nice. I have 14-foot ceilings, so very nice to have the space up there. But it's very hard to hang stuff from the ceiling. So, like, if I was in my basement shop, I would have just put a couple eyelets in the ceiling and ran, some, like, swing chain down to hang these parts on. Couldn't do that. So I had to rig up some 7/8 inch dowels in between 2 step ladders to hang all my parts from. Or it's fine. It's just not a good permanent solution, which, again, I don't like hanging stuff, or I don't like staining stuff, but
yeah.
I always feel like if I'm putting stain or finished parts flat on a bench, either a cat's going to walk on them, dust is going to settle on them. I mean, not that dust won't settle on hanging parts.
Right.
But a little
it's not
bit
the
less
same.
likely.
Yeah. I mean, you could use the hanging system even if you were clear finishing too.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm going to spray these with a water-based exterior, the Old Masters Ascend exterior. And I'm going to do that outside.
Yeah.
Yesterday, just it looked like it might start raining, and obviously that oil-based stain takes 12 hours to dry, so I wanted to have them inside for the night. But like when I spray the finish, absolutely, I'm hanging everything outside. I'm trying to decide whether I pre-stain these panels, so if they shrink, you don't see a stain line, shadow around them. I'm trying to decide if I put a one coat of clear finish on them before I assemble the door.
I would.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's kind of what I'm thinking. But I'm going to assemble the door, glue them up, and then stain the rails and stiles, which having a clear finish on the rails and stiles might be good because it'll keep the stain from penetrating. So, yeah, that's probably what I'll do, which means I can't glue these doors up until tomorrow, probably.
Mm-hmm.
So, but
all right, cool.
Yeah.
Let's see. I feel like I had a follow-up question in there somewhere. No, I think I'm okay.
Okay. It's enough about the doors.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some
and we are 2/3 of the way through a sauna session, so.
Right. And there's good stuff in there because you've brought up, and we'll address this next time when we are talking about the assembly, like, complex assembly strategies, even though you think to yourself, it's just a door. How hard can it be?
Yeah. Lots of parts that have to come together.
Once the glue goes on and the adrenaline starts flowing, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. So.
Yeah. Everybody's got a plan until you open up the glue bottle.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's another thing. Like when I did the dry assembly, just because usually I'm like, screw it. We're going cowboy. We're just going to glue it up. We're going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
As I watched John trim something down the other day with glue on it. I don't remember what that was.
Yeah. I was just going to bring that up too. It was one of the last 2 projects we did on the show, and it's like I got to beat glue on something, and I'm sending it through the table saw, and like, yep.
I'm pretty sure I completely called him out on it too.
Yep. Now that's a split-second decision there.
I decided to do this stupid dry assembly. I mean, just to check everything, before whatever. And I'm like, okay, everything fits really nicely. Does it fit nicely enough that I feel like I can glue the loose tenons in to the rails and then glue the stiles in? Or do I glue the loose tenon and have the wiggle room on both sides? I think that's how I'm going to do it.
Okay.
I think I'm going to do the glue on the loose tenons at the same time as the entire glue up.
Okay.
Because I have reference marks on everything. So I know where stuff should go.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens when stuff starts to swell with glue on it, but if I pre-finish the panels, any squeeze out on those should peel right off.
Right.
We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see.
Yeah. All right. That's a question for listeners is if you've done loose tenon joinery, and by that, I'm going to call it like whether it's a loose tenon, a biscuit, a domino, dowels, any of those kind of things. Are you gluing that floating insert in all at the same time? Or are you doing like a 2-stage where you put it into one component, let that dry, and then do the final assembly? That's the camp I usually follow in when I'm doing stuff like that, just to simplify things. But I don't know that there's one way better or worse on there. It's just different strategies. So it'd be interesting to hear what other people do.
I did decide that if I was going into exterior door production, I think I would need a little bit better way to do. The pantry router works really well.
That was one of my follow-up questions was, this is not to disparage Panto router, but it's not necessarily an industrial tool. And,
not yet.
But is it, when you were going along, because of the sheer number of joints that you were cutting, did you check it from time to time to make sure like stops didn't move or, okay.
No, and so here's an issue that I had with these doors. I don't think I said. So I made I marked reference faces on all my parts. Okay, reference faces are one of the things I think that people don't understand that will change the quality of your work significantly. Like marking reference faces makes everything go together so much easier. So like the parts, I laid them all out, marked reference faces. So as I am routing or running parts through the shaper, I'm using the same reference face every time. So reference face either is always up or it's always down.
Right.
And that is what it is. That helps everything go together. So your faces of all your parts are in the same plane. I did that. My parts are not in the same plane. So I don't know what happened. They're not off that far, like a 16th, 32nd, maybe. Just a couple swipes of a hand plane to flush everything up. It could be variance in my material thickness. Could be potential swelling in the thickness because a lot of the parts are truly coarse on, some are not. There's a lot of variables, right? But what I'm getting at is I knew that the tenon has to be a tight fit for these doors. So I actually, on each part that I put in the Panther router, adjusted the height of the cutter to match. Because I had the cope and stick already routed.
Oh, yeah.
I made sure the bit was exactly centered on the tongue or exactly centered in the groove.
Right.
Which is super simple to do on the Panther router. It, not an issue at all. I thought it was going to be a bigger issue than it was not an issue. But then it's just, honestly, at that point, I'm just using the Panther router as a slot mortiser.
Right.
Which I know the guys at Panther router would hate for me to say that, but that's what I was using it as, was a slot mortiser. It's more than that, but that's what I used it as. So if I was going to do doors on a regular basis, I would figure out a way to do those tenons, the mortises, a little bit better. It very well could be the Panther router, probably with an auxiliary table on it, or a slot mortiser would do it. Honestly, there's a lot of people that say they use a Domino XL to do exterior doors.
Right, I've seen that.
Which would probably be the fastest. So if I was truly trying to make a production out of it, I would probably do that because it's probably the fastest and the easiest to do. And definitely a power feeder for the shaper.
Okay.
So.
All right.
Yep.
I like it.
Yep.
All right. Segment 2 of today's episode, I'd like to talk about tool making in the sense that with ShopNotes magazine, we have done and continue to do shop-made tools. And I'm going to make a big tent out of this and talk about it in terms of we've done shop-made hand planes, layout tools, some actual shop-made machines, chisels. We did the edge sander. We do some drill press powered tools, small layout tools. And I think some of even the more involved jigs would fall into the tool category too, in my opinion. I feel like in the last few years, we've been building up to a point now where there's a little bit of a sea change in what's possible in terms of shop-made tools, in the sense that way back when, if you were making shop-made tools, it was an involved process with a lot of different woodworking, metalworking, that kind of thing. Then you have some of your major woodworking brands making specialized tools, Veritas, Lee Nielsen, that kind of thing. Then you get the like retailer places, Rockler, Woodcraft, starting to get into the game on stuff that's relatively easy to manufacture, but also relatively easy to make it look semi-custom. Then you get folk like Infinity or Woodpeckers, Blue Spruce, making tools and accessories aimed at a certain price point. And then now when you have a wider variety of 3D printing, CNCs, CNC mills, stuff like that, that are relatively accessible, I think the opportunity for people to come up with custom tools is a little bit more, more prevalent. There's a greater opportunity there. And so I would like you guys to maybe weigh in on who does that affect more, from a corporate standpoint, or are those totally different categories? Now, Logan, in Popwood, you've profiled several small, 1-2 person kind of shops that do high-end tools, and that's in there too.
Yeah, we do that pretty regularly. We call it our bespoke toolmaker spotlight, where there's a lot of these small 1-2 man shops, as you said, that are making they're making what I would call the highest quality tools around. They could be people making layout tools. They could be people making hand saws. They could be making hand planes. And I think what makes them the highest quality is that they are making each one individually for a specific purpose. So I think that the accessibility of producing tools and producing higher quality tools honestly affects the consumer more than it affects anybody else. Like, I don't think Woodpeckers feels, Hillview Tool in New York making some of the nicest layout squares. I don't think that's, Tony's not putting a dent in Woodpeckers things,
right?
So I think, but what I think it does is I think it offers up options to the consumer to say, okay, I need a new tri-square or combo square. I need a new combo square. Who do I go to?
Right.
You have dozens of options now, where it used to be, if you want a good combo square, you go to Sears or you order one from Starrett.
Yeah.
You can certainly make your own, and there are ways to have increased accuracy and precision in your shop now with CNCs and stuff like that. But yeah, I think what it does is I don't think the accessibility of manufacturing your own tools or making your own tools or people manufacturing at a small scale is hurting the retailers or the big manufacturers. There's more competition, and the consumer will feel that, whether that's, being hit with more ads for combo squares, or prices driven down because there is more competition, or
right.
I'm going to throw out a corporate word and say that there's more innovation in combo squares, like you know what I mean,
right?
I think that's what happens.
Okay.
But what also I think is happening, and this is interesting, and we maybe see it more on our side now, or currently, than the consumers do. There are a lot of overseas manufacturers that are starting to direct sell into the U.S. market.
Right.
There's a lot of them. Like, there was always those like knockoff, like woodpeckers knockoff tools on Amazon stuff, and I don't agree with that. Like those companies should not be doing that, because they are legitimately straight up knocking off woodpeckers tools, or the tenon cutters that we sell for log type furniture from Lumberjack Tools. You can find knockoffs that are literally using the Lumberjacks photos and selling them on Amazon.
Right.
Like that's shady as crap. But what there are these manufacturers in Asia and Europe that are able to manufacture and direct sell to the U.S. consumer base now their own products, not knocked off products, but their own products at a pretty reasonable cost. And as we've talked about before, like sometimes it's super high quality stuff.
Yeah.
Like I have been using a set of turning tools from Grizzly. When we got the South Bend lathe for the set there, they sent us a set of their new cryogenically treated turning tools. They're super nice. They're super nice. But there's another company that is now selling tools that are almost identical, to the point where they have to be the manufacturer that Grizzly is using to make these tools, is now selling them into U.S. markets. And I'm seeing their ads pop up in a lot of the turning publications and stuff. So what I'm getting at is I think it just in general makes more competition, which is good for the consumer, because you're getting either better value, you're getting more features, you're getting nicer tools, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, because I feel like I'm trying to think of what the specific example was just not that long ago. Like, as you said, that there are low-cost import tool manufacturers that are making things that have a unique look or a different look from what's out there already, clearly inspired by, some other more well-known examples, but also some that are just vastly different. But then if you go to like Etsy, you can see quite a few folk who are not a high-end bespoke maker, but they're a small two person kind of business cranking out some stuff that is probably more what I would call like a mid-range.
Yeah.
That I don't think that is necessarily served by other people. And then and where I was going with this is because of that, because you can see that stuff on Etsy, and it's clearly been made with a 3D printer or a CNC machine or something like that. Not that that's bad. It's just that's the evidence of the manufacturing process. So I'm thinking, say you're part of a woodworking club and somebody in the club has a CNC, somebody else in the club has a 3D printer, that opens up the opportunity for you as an individual to say, I would really like, this sort of a square that has this kind of shape or is specifically set at this particular angle because that's the kind of stuff you do all the time. And now you can turn out something that looks like a really cool tool as opposed to something that you kind of hacked out of a piece of 1/4 inch Baltic birch plywood or something.
Yeah. is that the equivalent of saying, wow, that looks like a tool that I could buy? Is that the equivalent of saying, wow, that piece of furniture looks like one I get at Target? Like, oh, thanks.
Yeah. A little bit of both, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I mean, that you bring up another interesting point, and it's one that it doesn't get thrown around a whole lot, but Etsy has, for the longest time, had a lot of, let's call them Eastern European or Western Asian countries that are manufacturing some really, really nice cutting tools. Like I had a set of chisels in for a review in Woodsmith several years ago from a company called Steery.
Oh, yeah.
That were out of the Ukraine. Super good steel. I found them on Etsy. And, over the last, 3 or 4 years, there's been a lot of them that have popped up out of the Ukraine. And I think they've always been there and they've always manufactured there. But the internet is obviously making everything more accessible, and stuff's easier to ship across the world now than it was, even 20 years ago. So, it's interesting. It also offers up the inspiration to make your own tools too. It's like, oh, like that's a really cool hand forged hewing axe. That looks like something I could probably make,
Right. See, and that's where I wonder, because I feel like that has the potential to make it harder for some of the like Rockler woodpecker or woodcraft kind of places where they're outsourcing the design and the manufacturing somewhere. And it's not necessarily high-end stuff, so that those are really accessible for people to 3D print or combine 3D printing with a CNC that can, cut some brass and aluminum and make something that actually looks really cool for a cost that's probably not that much different. And it ends up being a custom thing, even to the point of like those little spacers that you 3D printed in, in the millimeter sizes that you did. Like, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, could I have bought a set of those from Woodpeckers? Probably.
Right.
But I needed them right now, and I can get them right now. And the other thing that's interesting, and obviously the current times are a driving factor of this, but like a lot of those companies like, Rockler or any of the big retailers, a lot of their stuff is coming from Asia.
Yeah.
And there are tariffs in place, and that is a driving factor. Like, there are a lot of companies that we work with that are advertisers that say, hey, we don't really, we're on hold on a lot of our tool orders because we don't know, we can't afford to sell tools for this price. Like, nobody's going to buy them. And if we place an order, we have to pay that price. So we're going to have to sell them at a higher price and nobody's going to buy them. So, that definitely makes it more appealing. Even let's go as far as talk about the shop made CNC that we did in Woodsmith, right?
Right.
That's the type of thing too, where it's like, yeah, you could go buy a CNC or you can build one. And that I think was a big push. Like we saw a lot of those that got built because it was cheaper for people to build it at that point than it was to buy it.
Right.
So,
especially in the, when you go towards the capacity of it.
Yeah.
And the ability to sort of customize what you get in terms of what's going to drive it for software or things like that. So, yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the question that I have posed out there. I'd love to hear what any of the listeners or viewers have to say about that. If you've purchased a tool through Etsy from a small maker or from a boutique manufacturer, or if you've kind of came up with your own design and had either it made on your own equipment or someone that you know, I would love to hear about that. What your experience was on it. Is that something that you would be doing more often in the future? So, because I think it almost ends up being similar to a secondary market in the sense of, going to eBay or Etsy and buying a vintage hand plane that you're going to fix up yourself, or like you've done, Logan, with old tools. You're going those same sellers are selling new tools, but that they've made themselves. So you're just not going to find them in a store.
Yeah.
So to speak. So, all right, John, last words.
Just trying to coast into the weekend here. So.
All right, with that. There you go. That's it for another episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. Want to give a special shout out to one of our sponsors. This episode of the ShopNotes Podcast is brought to you by Grizzly Industrial, purveyors of fine woodworking machinery since 1983. Buy direct and save at grizzly.com. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye.